The market has a very short memory. Most people only remember what somebody said a few weeks ago, but few people actually make the effort of analyzing content that was published years ago. What did somebody say at the peak of the prior bull market? Did they still say that prices will go higher, or did they actually sell? What did they say at the bottom of a bear market? Did they say that we're going further down and it makes sense to wait, or did they actually buy the bottom? What about right now? So in this video, I want to go through some content of the premium membership of this channel. So all the videos that have ever been published in premium, they can still be watched today. There are in total 12 pages. And of course, we can't go through all of that content, but I want to focus on 3 inflection points. The end of the bull market in December of 2021, the end of the bear market at the beginning of 2023, and then of course we're also going to review a recent video published at the beginning of the month, just prior to our recent acceleration of the crash. So let's watch this together. I also want to comment on the content at the time. So let's start with December of 2021. This video over here.
Hi, so it does look like my initial skepticism here a few days back, where we broke through those moving averages for Ethereum, was somewhat justified. We're still fighting to see any kind of positive momentum. And when we look at Bitcoin and its 23 moving average, we are very clearly bearish. And I do have the impression we might simply relive what we saw at the beginning of the year.
Now it's interesting, actually, in this video I referred to the 23-day simple moving average. That's because at that time I didn't backtest all the moving averages up to the 200-day yet. So I only backtested up to the 50-day roughly, and there were 2 moving averages. I think it was 23 and it was 44 that tended to work pretty well up to that point. But then once I backtested all the way to the 200-day, then also the moving average duration, that's the best, tended to be longer. So that's just as a reference point. In this video, I still refer to the 23-day SMA.
Exactly like this, but those chart patterns, they simply look too similar in my opinion. So it's not exact science, right? You can't perfectly overlay this, but the issue is simply, my impression is we are running out of steam, at least for the large assets. So when we try to enter a new rally, when we hit a new all-time high, we always get these pullbacks. We always get people that take profit. It's not anymore like in the early days when we hit an all-time high that new momentum builds up and people get excited and we get a multiple X. Now we get a new all-time high and people take profits. And then if we don't even reach that all-time high, then we get the big dump. And we saw this again just recently, right? We had the all-time high in October and we got profit taking, another all-time high, and we go even lower. So it looks like there's not enough new money entering this space. And why do I say new money? That's because when we look at the dominances, so say Bitcoin dominance, right? It's going down for quite a while now, right? It's very bearish. For Ethereum, it's not as bad. And for the others dominance, it looks actually quite okay. So the smallest of the tokens, the smallest assets, they hold up somewhat. And so this could be due to 2 reasons. It could be that the smaller altcoins, they simply can rally easier. There's simply more interest in them. And so a lot of people simply do what we do, right? They come into crypto in order to speculate, in order to do short-term moves, short-term trades. So they're coming in it for the multiple X's and not necessarily for allocating large position in a diversified portfolio. When we look at the dominance, say, of Ethereum, it's bleeding somewhat, especially on the shorter time frame. So let's look maybe at the 4 hours, right? Ethereum is bleeding somewhat. Others dominance is not bleeding, and the Bitcoin dominance is going really, really down. So the more money it takes and the more conservative the bet, the more the bet is dependent on new money entering the space, and the less risky and thus the less potential it has, the worse it seems to currently do. And I can kind of understand this. I had the exact same journey personally, right? So I was simply dollar cost averaging for years. I started in May 2018, something like that. And then I bought every month. And then once we reached really high levels on Bitcoin, it doesn't look anymore that the risk versus reward is that attractive, because we can easily go, say, to 30K if things go bad. And on the other hand, we could go to, say, 100K. But it's not anymore that we can easily go to, say, 500K. And so we are more or less at a 50-50 here, right? We don't have potentially great risk versus reward. That was very different to when you bought over here, where you had the hope that we can make, say, a 5x or so, say when we were at 4,000, because we had these prices before. So a 5x versus, a 50% reduction. So we had a pretty pretty good target if you believe that the long-term chart, the very, very long-term chart of Bitcoin stays intact. And so new money isn't that excited about Bitcoin anymore. I even see a lot of entrants that completely skip Bitcoin because they feel like they don't really get a significant allocation to Bitcoin. Say when you invest 5,000 US, you get 0.1 of a Bitcoin. So that doesn't feel right. So I see a lot of people that enter to completely skip Bitcoin and they directly go to Ethereum. But even Ethereum now seems to have a bad time. Even Ethereum doesn't gain more dominance. It's mainly those small altcoin plays where Bitcoin still is. It's the coins that tend to have more potential. So Bitcoin is again at this point where it's not anymore necessarily an investment. It's not necessarily anymore an investment vehicle where you simply allocate, buy and forget. Crypto seems to be mainly a vehicle for speculation again. Now the issue is when Bitcoin and Ethereum, they can't go up, that at a certain point in time, the altcoins, they will bleed as well, because a lot of altcoin speculation, a lot of people in the market believe in this narrative that Bitcoin and Ethereum lead the market.
Let's actually refer now to the others' dominance at the time. So this is when that video was published, right? So we went all the way up to a bit over 60K, went back down, went up again. This here was where the video was published, and the others' dominance, it can be seen over here on this chart. So the others' dominance actually did do quite well, but interestingly enough, right, when Bitcoin really went into the bear market, the altcoins also underperformed. So this prediction that was made over here, if Bitcoin and Ethereum can't go higher, that then the altcoins will get sold off more. It did take a while to materialize, so it did take another month or so. The altcoins still kept their value relatively well, but then afterwards they really sold off once the market got much more risk off. So this seems to have aligned pretty much with the thesis at the time. So it was very hard for crypto to make new gains because it has already grown that much in the prior years and people just took profit as we hit new all-time highs. There wasn't any more of that excitement. And once this became more apparent and Bitcoin really fell, that's then also when the altcoins sold off quicker. But let's continue with the video again.
Coins, they are simply highly correlated. So there's this idea, right, that money flows from big to small over time. So new money enters the space, Bitcoin is going up, and then the further you go down the rabbit hole, the more you learn about crypto, the more risky altcoins you buy. And so the money flows from initially, like the new money from Bitcoin, further and further up the risk curve. And so it seems like everything is somewhat risky now, right? Bitcoin obviously is. The 23-day moving average, which is historically the most significant one, looks pretty bearish. Ethereum also doesn't look too great. And then even though the altcoins, they do look fine now, given that a lot of people have a look at those two leading assets in the space, Bitcoin and Ethereum, given that the altcoin speculation will also turn bearish when these assets, Bitcoin and Ethereum, go down, it might even be a problem to get into altcoins too heavy, unless you have an altcoin that is really very lowly correlated with the market.
Okay, I think so that's it. Now I go into more detail of hyped assets at the time, like Time Wonderland, etc. I think we can skip that. And I also want to still discuss the other videos, right? So 3 videos that I want to go through. This was like a typical video where I was bearish, and you might recognize me today, like my current videos that I publish that tend to be bearish. I've even changed the name of this channel in case you haven't noticed yet. But yeah, this is kind of like the kind of content you know me for if you've just discovered this channel in the last few weeks. But I want to talk about what I said actually here, right? When we started to recover. So at the beginning of 2023, we could also take videos that came out a bit earlier. But I think this is a nice time because this is where we already read a little bit. It was relatively clear that we would go in a bull market if you weren't just a perma bear, right? This is what I sometimes get as an accusation, as in I'm always bearish on everything. And if we don't know the future, right? If you just look at the chart like this, maybe on a logarithmic scale, one could make the argument that maybe this is just a trap, as in we are now still in a bear market and maybe this is just a temporary rally and we should be turning around anytime soon. Or maybe after a while we might make that argument. So there is an argument to be made that these kind of levels are right for selling and that we simply just continue to go down. But then of course the rest is history. We hit new all-time highs. So I want to talk about that specific time period here, right? That specific moment in time rather, in March of 2023. And we're gonna go We're going to discuss that video. Now, the beginning of that video just shows some new updated backtests on a new asset. So that was total 3, I believe, a new moving average backtest update, which I think doesn't make much sense to look at now because there's also new updates for the moving average now. But I want to talk about the market situation discussion at the time. So let's have a look.
This is the current situation with total 3. We are above both. So in terms of US dollars, the altcoin market is likely to go up. Now, I still want to show my doubts that the altcoin rotation is probably not going to happen that quickly, but I am very, very bullish on Bitcoin, especially over the next weeks long term.
Okay, so the altcoin rotation isn't happening that quickly. In other words, others' dominance is likely not going up. Let's have a look if that actually happened. And the answer is yes. The alts in the next few weeks didn't do that well. There was a recovery, then afterwards they went down. So there was definitely no real altcoin season at that point. So that was correct. But let's continue and look at the actual reasoning.
Let me show you what exactly I mean. So maybe first things first, about Bitcoin, why do I think it's so bullish? So if you just look at the long-term charts, for example, the market value to realized value Z-score, right, with the realized value line here in blue, we are now coming out of this bear market. And historically, when we came out of this, we usually followed up with a very, very nice rally. This is Bitcoin over the very long term, right? And so this measure looks at the delta of the price to the realized price being the price when Bitcoin last time moved. Whenever the price is below the realized price, the market in aggregate is at losses. Whenever the price is above the realized price, the market as a whole is in gains.
By the way, I still like to look at that measure, the MVRV Z-score. There are better measures now. There are also some combined measures like the CBBI that looks at the gains and losses of Bitcoin relative to the market in a bit more detail or in a more holistic manner. But it's still a nice way to see how much is the market currently in profit relative to the volatility. So you can actually have a look at this right now. Here is that chart today, the market value to realized value Z-score. This is where the video was published. We indeed actually went up, but we didn't go up to the prior extreme highs, right? This was the surprise of the prior bull market. I'm already talking about it as if it's now over. In my mind, we have finished this bull market. We are going down from here. We haven't seen this blow off top, right? This excitement phase that we've seen in 2018 and in 2021. So this was more of a muted bull market. The long-term holders sold into the bull market. Now the long-term holders are selling even more aggressively. But yeah, it's good to just have a look at the current price relative to the realized price. And whenever we are below, it might make sense to buy a bit and then have a look at how much are we extending. And then, of course, always be open that things might not extend as much as they did in the past. We might even want to draw a line like this, right? Maybe the tops simply just decline over time. At what rate? That's always more art than science. Very hard to know where we really turn around. But that's why we've got several kinds of indicators, right? We've also got the realized hodl ratio, or we've got the net unrealized profit and loss. And there the tops align a little bit better. But in general, timing the bottoms, I believe, is a bit easier than timing the tops. At least it used to be. In the future, it's very hard to say, because if, say, the AI bubble was to pop, right? If AI is going to crash in the same manner as .com did, and of course, all bets are off. Then Bitcoin could fall way below all kinds of models that we used for Bitcoin's history, because we've never really seen a real depression during Bitcoin's lifetime. Bitcoin was born at the end of the global financial crisis in 2009. And the main crisis we had before were .com and the GFC. We only had COVID during Bitcoin's lifetime, but COVID recovered very quickly, and COVID only saw a stock market crash, quote unquote, of 30%. But .com was way worse, right? .com made NASDAQ companies go down in valuation of more than 80%. And what then happens to Bitcoin is still completely unclear, right? Then those kinds of models here might not really work that well anymore. But let's continue with the video. By the way, this Discord link over here, that's not valid anymore. There's no Discord. There's only the Telegram channel. And even the public Telegram channel isn't really that active. There's a lot of scammers there, unfortunately, as well, that are hard to delete. So if you really want to chat directly with the community, if you want to chat with me directly, then there's of course always the premium membership. This is where the videos also are coming from. So let's go on.
So whenever the price is below the realized price, like over here, since everybody's in losses and long-term Bitcoin appreciates, the sell pressure is way, way lower than the other way around, right? When the price is above, then people tend to take profits. So in general, whenever price is below realized price, we want to be accumulating heavily. And when we come out of this, when people start to get into profits again, it's usually when attention goes up for Bitcoin again. and when we can make money from this, when Bitcoin appreciates. So this is very, very positive. We are starting to pick up here. And a different measure with a similar result though is the Rodel ratio. So this simply just looks at how much activity is there in the last week versus in the last 1 to 2 years. When there's a lot of activity, so when this orange line is very high, then there's a lot of speculation in the market, a lot of hype, you want to be selling, vice versa. When it's very low, nobody looks at Bitcoin, that's when you want to be buying. And this looks very similar. It tracks these tops and bottoms pretty well. And we are now coming out of this trough. We are picking up with short-term transaction activity again.
So let's have a look at this again. Here is the Rodel ratio. And as said, here the tops align a bit better. And this is where the video that we just watched was published. So indeed, we did pick up. And indeed, right, Bitcoin went from 20K and made more than a 5 to 6x from that point. So those kind of indicators do work. They are quite useful to time tops and bottoms. My personal favorite now is a composite index. So it's called the CBBI at cbbi.info. And it combines the Pi cycle top indicator. It combines net unrealized profit and loss. The Rodel ratio we just looked at, moving averages, regression charts, MVRV Z-score. It's a combination of all of that. And it's an indicator that goes from 0 to 100. And while we might not top at 100, it's a good idea of how much we should be allocated towards risk-on assets, right? Not that much when we are at 80, but quite a lot when we are between 0 and 10. Let's continue.
So bullish as well. There are also two other interesting metrics that try to determine tops and bottoms. So the balance price, where we bounced off historically relatively well. Now we're coming up here. The cumulative value days destroyed, similar thing, a bottom metric. And then we've got the terminal price, a top metric, which is at around 100K. And it was relatively useful in determining tops in the past. So this is kind of the upside potential versus downside potential. If you just look at.
By the way, this website, lookintobitcoin.com, it's now bitcoinmagazine.com. The same indicators are still published over there for free, so feel free to check it out.
These long-term charts, downside risk being 17K or so, on this model 14.5K, upside potential being around 100K. So risk versus reward still looks quite useful. Another interesting thing why I'm bullish on Bitcoin is here the miner revenue from the fees, so from the transaction fees. And whenever this peaks up, this is when the market wakes up, so to speak. And whenever this is down, transactions aren't high enough. It's only inflation that miners profit from, right? So it's not the additional transaction fee. So it's just another metric basically of how active the market currently is. It's very nice how this actually triggers quite reliably these bear markets and bull markets, how it's indicating them. And this is now turning bullish. There was only one fake out in early 2019, but besides that, this is relatively useful in spotting those bull markets and bear markets. So overall, I think Bitcoin itself looks very nice. Now the question is always about rotation, right? When are we going to move from Bitcoin to Ethereum and from Ethereum to altcoins? And there is this saying, right, that the capital basically flows across the crypto space from risk off to risk on the further we proceed in the bull market. And I want to drive this home that this is actually not just a theory, this is true. So let's look at total 3 here, minus BTC market cap, USDTs and USDCs. So now we're looking at the altcoins minus all of these stablecoin market caps, and look at this relatively speaking to Bitcoin. So how large are the risky altcoins relative to the Bitcoin market cap? And let's zoom out over here. And what we see is a somewhat medium-term downward trend since May of 2021. But what we see here as a horizontal line is where the altcoins really bottomed. So Bitcoin was here, relatively speaking, at a peak, and then came the rotation, right? The rotation pro to the altcoins happened at the beginning of January. So when we zoom very closely in here, one could say it's between the 1st and the 8th of January, something like this. And so when we look at Bitcoin during the time, we zoom out, right? The 7th of January, this is when Bitcoin really rallied. But relatively speaking, the altcoins, they crashed. So Bitcoin went up, the altcoins didn't. They took time to catch on. So Bitcoin went up all the way to basically 40K until the altcoins got their share. Now there is a bit of a delay regarding Ethereum. So look at this. This is the 1st of February. So this is then where Ethereum shot up quite nicely. And when we look at this in the relative valuation, again, total 3 minus stablecoins relative to ETH, we see this bottom here on the 3rd of February. So slightly delayed relative to Bitcoin. The Bitcoin bottom is the 4th of January. The bottom of the altcoins relative to ETH is on the 3rd of February, 1 month roughly. Then afterwards, the altcoins exploded. So we can say that the altcoins hit a bottom relative to Bitcoin the earliest, 1 month later to Ethereum, and then the actual rotation from ETH to the altcoins happened, where then the altcoins outperformed ETH by 190% from bottom to top. For Bitcoin, the outperformance was 400% even. So really, this is when you want to be in altcoins. There aren't so many times in the market where you want to go away from Bitcoin and Ethereum.
Yeah, I can see how this might be quite confusing today. I think there are better measures to figure out how the altcoins might be doing, especially because a lot of the liquidity movements happen from ETH to the altcoins and from altcoins to Ethereum, because there are liquidity pools where the trades happen. So most of the altcoins are directly bound to the Ethereum price. And so what I think is best to figure out, does it make sense to be in altcoins partially, is to just look at the Ethereum market cap relative to the others market cap. So just search for this in TradingView, ETH divided by others, and then you get this chart. And this is a relatively constant trading range. And this is a chart I believe tells the story in a much better way. As in, at what point in time does it make sense to be heavily in ETH, and at what point does it make sense to be more in the alts? Currently, Ethereum is very expensive. I do believe that Ethereum is very likely going to underperform the altcoins in the not too distant future. Now, this does not mean that the altcoins will rally. I do not think that they will, because there's just not enough attention by the retail investor. This is very likely going to be just an expression of Ethereum getting sold off, because Tom Lee with Bitmine, etc., cannot buy that much Ethereum anymore to support the price. So my base case now is that we are entering a bear market, that Bitcoin will sell off, that Ethereum will sell off even more because it's more risky of an asset. But the altcoins are probably not going to sell off that much because retailers already sold most of them. So there's apathy in the market. And so besides, of course, the token inflation that pushes some selling pressure on many altcoins, if we just look at the altcoin market cap, not at the altcoin prices, we just compare altcoin market cap to Ethereum market cap, I do think that Ethereum has more downside right now than the altcoins, simply also just because of this trading range. And that would be my main indication now to look at different rotations. I think what's explained here in this video is a bit confusing, but I think in general we already have a pretty good point of how sentiment can change, right? I'm not a perma bear. Sometimes I'm bullish on things, sometimes I'm not. And I think had you watched the video at the time, maybe you did, right? Maybe you're already a premium subscriber. You might have gone into risk on assets, you might have bought Bitcoin. And Bitcoin dominance, let's have a look at that. Bitcoin dominance at the time also went up. So everything pretty much developed according to plan. So yeah, I also want to talk, of course, about the recent developments, as in, did it make sense? And did I foresee, quote unquote, did I expect the sell-off? And if you've been watching this YouTube channel for a while, you might already have the answer, right? I did sell quite a bit. But yeah, let's have a look at the reasoning again here in the video. So that video was published at the beginning of November, at the beginning of the month. Welcome to another premium update today on the 4th of November 2025. We are below both moving averages. We continue to sell off, especially the altcoin sell off, which is good for our relative valuation trade. So as usual, let's start off with this chart. Bitcoin with the 125-day simple moving average, the line in turquoise, and the 44-day simple moving average, the line in orange. We are currently below both. We should rather be betting on falling than on rising prices. But really, it's not just Bitcoin that's selling off. It's mainly the altcoins. This is the others dominance. And since I'm expecting Ethereum to continue to go down, the altcoins are likely going to follow, since there's a lot of correlation between alts and ETH. Here, have a look at the Ethereum dominance. That's now the chart at the bottom. The others dominance and the Ethereum dominance tend to peak at the same time. They also tend to bottom at the same time. And while there are sometimes slight divergences, where here the alts are going up, while Ethereum's dominance is going down, in general, it's not great for the altcoins when Ethereum dominance continues to rather bleed. And so I've taken advantage of the sell-off. I've closed two of the relative valuation shorts, one being Cosmos Atom relative to Bitcoin. That made 17% over the span of 10 days. And over here, the Jito relative to Solana short, which made 23% in 2 weeks. Both altcoins are very close to the lower end of their trading ranges. And so, at least short term, it's unlikely that they're going to underperform that much. If we, of course, then start to recover again over the next weeks, I might re-enter the short, because long term, those are very attractive relative valuation positions because of the tokenomics. So yeah, Ethereum bounced in the middle of April when the treasury companies started buying, but now those purchases tend to slow down. It's only Tom Lee with Bitmine that continues to buy, but that's also decreasing in rate. And so I can't blame people taking profit
after a more than 2x outperformance.
By the way, the buying of Tomny's Bitmine has slowed down even further. So we do not see any marginal buyers for Ethereum. I do expect this to continue to go down. Even now, this video has been published 3-4 weeks ago. I do expect this trend to continue. I'm very bearish on Ethereum, as already mentioned before.
Versus the rest of the market. While at the same time, there is a strong resistance on the dollar chart as well. You don't need to be a rocket scientist to see how this is not very positive momentum. The market is turning more and more risk off. So Bitcoin dominance is going up. The stablecoin dominance is going up as well. Ethereum dominance is going down. Solana dominance is going down even further. And so the more we go up the risk curve, the more losses we currently see. Here is Solana's dominance. This is a trading range established at the beginning of last year. And we are not yet at the bottom of that range, which is 2.2%. So Solana still has some way to go to underperform.
That's the range today, and we seem to have already bottomed. It's very hard to say if this was already the turnaround, if you get one more leg down, but I think the base thesis is rather that Solana dominance will see a recovery from here, which is a potential opportunity for relative valuation shorts on the Solana chain, right? So we could bet on falling prices of highly inflating altcoins on Solana. So we bet short the altcoin and then we go long Solana. So we're not just betting on the altcoin doing poorly, we are also betting on the macro to a degree of Solana dominance recovering. Now this is just a short-term recovery, right? Over the next months, Solana is likely going to go down. So because again, if the market in general goes down, if Bitcoin, Ethereum goes down, then the more risk-on assets will go down as well. And Solana is more risk-on than Bitcoin or Ethereum. But short-term, like over the next few weeks, Solana has already sold off quite a bit and it can definitely recover if it just respects the trading range that it has established in the last 2 years. Let's continue.
Things turn really sour if we get into a bear market. There's even much more potential loss, not just an underperformance of 13%, but maybe even of more than 80%. Now, I'm not saying that this is already confirmed, that this is the most likely scenario, but I'm just pointing out the potential risks that we currently face in the market, especially for risk-on assets. And so Bitcoin dominance is likely going to go up, and the situation will be much tougher once we reach the 73% dominance. Because historically, once Bitcoin dominance reached that level, that's when the altcoins rallied, that's when Ethereum rallied as well. I'm just hoping that the signs will align again.
Yeah, okay, I think that should be it for this video. I won't go through the entire premium update. I do not think that there will be an altcoin season when we are in a bear market, obviously. Usually the altcoins only rally when there's a lot of attention, when Bitcoin has already hit new all-time highs. I'm currently rather betting on falling prices. I'm looking for entry opportunities of assets that have rallied, that have high inflation. We can then bet on falling prices of those alts and do that relative to Bitcoin and do that relative to Solana mainly, because as said, I'm rather bearish on Ethereum given all the relative valuation charts, but also given that I don't see who should be buying Ethereum right now. Wall Street isn't buying it and the retail investor is gone as well. And so yeah, hope you found some value out of this video. Hope you got a clearer picture of how I look at the market. I tried to stick with the indicators that tended to work in the past, that tend to predict cycle tops and cycle bottoms relatively well. And if all of those indicators, or at least most of them, are currently showing rather negative momentum, I think it makes sense to just be cautious. If it's your first time here, feel free to subscribe. I publish this regularly. A like would be very much appreciated as well. It helps the channel grow. See you next time on YouTube, or potentially see you in premium as well. Link to premium pops up here on the screen. See you next time. Cheers.